These are the 25 most notoriously unreliable American engines ever made, a topic that's sure to spark some debate and bring up a little heartbreak. Introduced in the late 1990s, the Chrysler 2.7-liter V6 was supposed to be a solid mid-range engine option for cars like the Dodge Stratus, Chrysler Sebring, and Jeep Liberty. But it didn't take long for this engine to earn a reputation as one of the most problematic power plants to ever come out of Detroit. The biggest issue with the 2.7-liter V6 was its oil sludge problem. It seemed like no matter how often you changed oil or kept up with maintenance, the engine would still suffer from excessive sludge buildup. This gunk would clog the oil passages, starve the engine of power lubrication, and cause premature engine failures. Owners would find themselves with expensive repairs or, in some cases, a full engine replacement, all before hitting 100,000 miles. So if you were one of the unlucky folks who had this engine under the hood, you'd probably end up with more engine problems than you'd care to count. Next up is a heavy-duty engine that gave a lot of Ford truck owners a headache. The Ford 6.0-liter Power Stroke diesel. This engine was introduced in 2003, and it was supposed to be a powerhouse in Ford's Super Duty trucks. Unfortunately, it quickly gained a reputation for being one of the most unreliable diesel engines ever made. The engine had some serious issues with its head gaskets in the EGR cooler. The EGR cooler would often crack, causing coolant to leak to the engine, and the head gaskets would blow due to excessive pressure. If that wasn't enough, the turbochargers would often fail prematurely, leaving owners with repair bills that could break the bank. Let's just say this engine was not the heavy-duty workhorse Ford was hoping for. It led to a lot of frustrated owners who wished they had opted for a different diesel engine. Next on the list, we have the most problematic engine there could be ever, known as the Chevrolet 5.7-liter V8 LM7. Chevy had a long history of producing iconic engines, but even they've had their fair share of duds. The LM7 is a prime example of a seemingly good engine that turned out to be problematic. This engine powered many full-size Chevy and GMC trucks in the 2000s, but it had a reputation for suffering from a myriad of issues. One of the main problems with LM7 was the intake manifold gasket. The gasket would often fail, causing coolant leaks and leading to engine overheating. And that's not even the worst part. The engine was known for blowing head gaskets as well. To make matters worse, many owners reported issues with the fuel injectors and a high failure rate of the spark plugs. In short, this engine wasn't nearly as reliable as you'd expect from Chevy's legendary small block V8 lineup. We've got another Chrysler product to talk about, the Dodge 2.7-liter V6, which was used in a variety of Chrysler and Dodge vehicles. Similar to the 2.7-liter V6 from Chrysler, this engine also suffered from oil sludge buildup and excessive engine wear. The Dodge version wasn't quite as notorious as its Chrysler sibling, but it still had its fair share of engine failures and reliability issues. One of the main complaints from owners was that the engine would consume oil at an alarming rate, leading to premature wear and eventual engine failure. If you didn't stay on top of the oil changes, you were in for trouble. But even those who did keep up with regular maintenance weren't always spared. This engine was just a ticking time bomb, and when it went hard. General Motors' 3.4-liter V6 was introduced in the early 90s and was used in a wide variety of vehicles, including the Chevy Malibu and Pontiac Grand Am. On paper, this engine looked good. It was powerful, relatively fuel efficient, and had the potential to be a workhorse. Unfortunately, this engine had a critical design flaw in the intake manifold gasket, which led to coolant leaks and, in some cases, complete engine failure. The problem wasn't just that the engine would overheat, but that the coolant would mix with the oil, causing irreparable damage to the engine's internals. It wasn't unusual for owners to experience multiple repairs, only to have the problem return shortly after. If you had one of these engines, you were probably looking at a costly repair bill more often than you'd like to admit. The Ford 5.4-liter Triton V8, another engine that started with a lot of promise but ended up being a reliability nightmare for many Ford owners. This engine powered many Ford F-150 trucks and larger vehicles, but it was plagued by a number of mechanical failures that made it infamous. One of the biggest problems was the spark plugs. Ford's design used long, fragile spark plugs that were notorious for breaking off during replacement. And if that wasn't enough, the engine was also known for having issues with the cam phasers, which caused a loud ticking noise and eventually led to engine failure if not addressed. Many owners also complain about poor fuel economy and excessive oil consumption, making it a less than ideal choice for those looking for a reliable, long-lasting engine. Next on our list is another engine from Chrysler's catalog, the 3.5-liter V6. Now, this one had a bit of promise, but in the end, it was more nightmare than dream ride. The engine was used in a variety of vehicles, including the Chrysler 300M, Dodge Intrepid, and several other models. What killed this engine's reputation? Well, the biggest issue was the timing belt and timing chain. Over time, they would stretch and eventually fail, which could lead to catastrophic engine damage. But that wasn't all. Oil sludge was also a common problem that would lead to engine starvation and expensive repairs. If you were rocking this engine, chances are you spent a little more time in the repair shop than you care to admit. Chevrolet's 4.3-liter V6 engine, also known as the Vortec, is actually a great example of an engine that, on paper, should have been a winner. It was used in many Chevy pickups and SUVs throughout the 90s and early 2000s, but it had one major problem: the intake manifold gaskets. They were prone to failure, leading to coolant leaks and ultimately blown head gaskets. But that's not the worst of it. This engine had an issue with excessive oil consumption. Even those who stayed on top of maintenance found themselves constantly topping off the oil, only for the engine to burn through it faster than you could say fuel efficiency. It left a lot of owners scratching their heads, wondering if they'd gotten a lemon. You might be thinking, how could a big V8 like the Dodge 5.9-liter Magnum be on the list of unreliable engines? Well, it was a beast in terms of power, but unfortunately, that power didn't come without a cost. The Magnum V8 had a problem with valve lifter failures. Over time, these lifters would wear down, leading to engine misfires, rough idle, and eventually complete engine failure. This issue often resulted in costly repairs, especially since many owners would need to replace the camshaft along with the lifters. If you were driving a Dodge truck or SUV with this engine, you'd probably have some choice words for it at some point. We've mentioned a few troublesome Ford engines, but the Ford 4.6-liter SOHC V8 deserves its own mention. This engine was used in a range of Ford vehicles, from the F-150 to the Crown Victoria, and even some Lincoln models. The most notorious issue with this engine was its spark plug design. Much like the Triton V8, the spark plugs on the 4.6-liter had a nasty habit of breaking off during removal. If that wasn't bad enough, the engine was prone to timing chain failures as well. This could cause major engine damage if it wasn't caught in time, which unfortunately wasn't always the case. Not exactly the kind of reliability you want from a workhorse engine. The Ford 7.3-liter Power Stroke Diesel. This engine has a reputation for being nearly indestructible, and in its later versions, it was. But the early models of the 7.3-liter Power Stroke, not so much. The main issue was the fuel injector problems. In the early days, these injectors would fail prematurely, which could lead to a range of issues from rough idling to full-on engine failure. It didn't matter how much you loved your truck. If you had the earlier version of this engine, you were probably fighting a losing battle with its injector issues. The Chevrolet 3.1-liter V6, also known as the 3100, found its way into a lot of GM vehicles in the 90s, including the Chevy Malibu and Pontiac Grand Prix. This engine had an issue with head gasket failure that could lead to coolant leaking into the engine and causing all sorts of headaches. But it wasn't just the head gaskets that were problematic. Owners also complained about poor fuel economy, excessive oil consumption, and transmission problems. This engine's legacy is that it was a great idea that didn't execute as smoothly as hoped. If you were unlucky to own one of these, you probably ended up spending a lot of time at the mechanic's garage and a lot of cash on repairs. The Cadillac Northstar 4.6-liter V8 was hailed as a technological marvel when it was first released in the 1990s. But as time went on, it became clear it was also one of the most unreliable engines Cadillac ever produced. The Northstar had a major head gasket problem, with the gaskets often failing and causing coolant to leak into the engine, resulting in expensive repairs. It also suffered from oil leaks, coolant leaks, and an overall lack of long-term durability. If you owned a car with a Northstar engine, you were pretty much guaranteed to deal with an engine that just couldn't hold up. The Chevrolet 2.2-liter Ecotec 4-cylinder engine was used in a wide range of Chevy vehicles, including the Chevy Cobalt and Saturn Ion. While this engine had decent fuel economy, it was plagued by timing chain issues and oil consumption problems. The timing chain would often stretch or snap, causing the engine to fail. Additionally, the engine consumed oil at an alarming rate, which caused many owners to constantly add oil between oil changes. This engine just wasn't built to last, and it left many owners with engine failures long before they ever reached the 150,000-mile mark. The Jeep 4.0-liter inline-six might be an American icon when it comes to off-road engines, but even legends have their flaws. This engine was known for being a bit of a gas guzzler, but it also had a head gasket issue that caused coolant leaks, overheating, and eventually engine failure. Jeep owners loved their 4.0-liter, but many found themselves stuck on the side of the road with a busted engine due to this persistent issue. Next up, we've got the Ford 6.8-liter V10, a beast of an engine that powered many Ford trucks and motorhomes. But as big as it was also prone to oil consumption and valve seal issues. Many owners reported that their V10 engines would burn through oil at a ridiculous rate, leading to the engine running dry and eventually seizing up. This engine was particularly notorious in motorhomes, where it would often fail after just a few years of use. Not exactly the most reliable engine if you're planning on putting a lot of miles on your RV, that's for sure. When GM decided to jump on the diesel bandwagon with the Oldsmobile Diesel V8, they quickly learned the hard way that rushing innovation leads to disaster. Instead of designing a proper diesel engine from the ground up, GM tried to cut corners by adapting a gasoline engine block to handle diesel's intense compression. Spoiler alert, it didn't work out. The head gaskets gave out faster than you could say engine failure, and soon after, cracked blocks and corroded fuel injectors joined the party. For owners, this meant constant breakdowns, sky-high repair bills, and endless frustration. To make matters worse, the lawsuits came pouring in faster than the engine could overheat. GM's reputation took a massive hit, and this engine became a cautionary tale. The lesson here is simple: you can't rush greatness, especially when it comes to diesel engineering. When Chevrolet introduced the 2.8-liter V6 in 1980, they envisioned it as the perfect middle ground between fuel efficiency and decent power. Unfortunately, it could not have been more of a letdown. The engine quickly gained a bad reputation for its weak oiling system, which led to sludge buildup. Imagine oil passages clogged with sludge, preventing the engine from getting the lubrication it desperately needed. It was a ticking time bomb. The camshaft wasn't much better. Its lobes wore down faster than a pair of cheap shoes, which robbed the engine of both performance and efficiency. Throw in frequent overheating issues and you got the perfect recipe for disaster. The 2.8-liter V6's short production run speaks of volumes. It simply couldn't deliver on its promises. Unreliable, underperforming, and unable to live up to its ambitious goals. This engine remains a cautionary tale in Chevy's history. The AMC V8 came onto the scene with big dreams, intended to power everything from the sporty Javelins to the rugged Jeep Wagoneers. But instead of living up to its potential, it quickly became infamous for its poor build quality and glaring design flaws. The engine was a magnet for problems, from constant oil leaks to catastrophic head gasket failures, with overheating issues that turned every drive into a stressful gamble. Its performance didn't help matters. Lacking the power and fuel efficiency needed to compete with other V8 engines of its time, the AMC V8 fell short in every department. By the 1980s, this engine was phased out, leaving behind a legacy of broken promises, unreliable performance, and a long trail of disappointed drivers. It's safe to say the AMC V8 won't be remembered fondly. The Chevy 305 V8 had potential. It really did, but it never quite got off the starting line. Designed as a budget-friendly option during the smog-regulated 70s, it sacrificed performance to meet emission standards. Its small bore size choked airflow and power, while quirks like valve shrouding made it an efficiency nightmare. On paper, it was a practical choice, but on the road, not so much. Drivers were left unimpressed by the engine's weak acceleration and frequent oil leaks, making it a disappointment in everything from muscle cars to everyday commuters. Sure, it was cheap and easy to produce, but what good's an engine if it can't perform when it counts? Despite hanging around for years, the 305 V8 carved out a legacy as one of Chevy's most unforgettable options. A textbook case of good enough just not being good enough. The Iron Duke sounded like the name of a champion, but in reality, this engine was more of a bench warmer. Pontiac's 2.5-liter inline-4 promised durability and simplicity, yet it constantly delivered headaches that no one signed up for. Overheating issues? You bet. Chipped timing gears? Oh, absolutely. And with its sluggish performance, this engine barely kept up with everyday traffic, let alone delivered the punch expected from a performance vehicle. The Firebird, equipped with the Iron Duke, might have had the name of a sports car, but under the hood, not so much. It struggled with power and reliability, which made the driving experience more frustrating than fun. While the Iron Duke limped along through the 90s, its legacy as a weak, underperforming engine is hard to forget. Let's be real, this Duke never ruled the road. The Chrysler 2.5-liter i4 seemed like a solid pick for vehicles like the PT Cruiser and Dodge Neon, but under the hood it was more of a ticking time bomb than a reliable engine. Its head gaskets were notorious for failure, causing a dangerous mix of oil and coolant to seep into places they never should have been. The result, overheating, followed by the eventual demise of the engine itself. But wait, there's more. The real trouble came in the form of oil sludge buildup. Poor circulation meant that the oil thickened over time, blocking vital passages and suffocating the engine. Drivers quickly found themselves trapped in an endless cycle of repairs, often feeling the sting of frustration. Chrysler made attempts to fix the issues, but the damage to its reputation was already done, leaving a lasting sour taste for many owners. Chevrolet tried to push the limits with its Vega 2.3-liter engine, but what they really pushed was their customers' patience. This so-called innovative engine came with an aluminum block that sounded like a great idea on paper, but the lack of proper reinforcement led to a series of overheating issues, warping, and ultimately total engine failure. If that wasn't bad enough, the Vega engine was a notorious oil guzzler, consuming oil like a teenager on their first long road trip and leaking coolant like a sieve. Despite multiple recalls and redesigns in an attempt to fix its flaws, nothing could salvage the Vega's reputation. This engine quickly became the poster child for poor engineering. Innovation's great, but it doesn't count for much when reliability is sacrificed for the sake of new ideas. GM's 2.4-liter Ecotec started with a promise of efficiency but quickly turned into a nightmare for many drivers. The timing chain tensioner, a notorious weak point, often failed, causing the timing chain to skip. Since this was an interference engine, a skip chain meant bent valves and a wallet-emptying repair bill. But that wasn't the end of the misery. The engine was a heavy oil guzzler, forcing owners to constantly monitor oil levels to prevent major damage. Add in frequent leaks and problematic carbon buildup, and it's clear this engine was more of a headache than a solution. It's no surprise the Ecotec quickly lost favor with anyone who knew better. Finally, we come to the 1995 Chrysler 2.0-liter SOHC, an engine that became the stuff of nightmares for Dodge Neon owners. Its infamous head gasket failures were the primary culprit, causing coolant and oil to mix, resulting in devastating overheating and inevitably engine failures. But the issues didn't stop there. The timing belt was another major weak point, snapping with alarming frequency, leaving owners stranded. Oil leaks were a constant headache, making routine maintenance a never-ending battle. Despite its compact design, this engine failed to deliver any of the efficiency or reliability drivers hoped for. Chrysler's attempts to resolve these issues came too late, leaving the 2.0-liter SOHC with a tarnished reputation it couldn't shake. If you had or came close to one of these engines, let us know in the comments. Remember to subscribe and like the video.